Welcome to the SWIKE Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SWIKE Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here again with our guest host, Brian Yang. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic.
Sounds good. And we thought we'd have a discussion on a key life skill. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about consistency, right? And really kind of free flow a little bit on discussing it, like what it is, what it means to each of us, and getting into our each other's heads a little bit. So
Absolutely.
Brian, why don't you start us off and talk a little bit about consistency, what it is for you, and then we'll get the ball rolling for the conversation.
Sure, let's do it. I think I think that's one of the things I would even like to kind of pick your brain about too, Luki. So the idea, I don't really know how to define consistency, because I would want to say first thing is a trait that I would say I never valued, up to what I'm like early 30s in my life. But until recently, I haven't realized how important it is in terms of to me right now. I think it is probably the most important trait to anybody's sort of growth, progress, success, sort of achievement. I think being consistent at something is probably the greatest skill that one needs to have. So consistency have what I've always thought, and maybe this is more of an extreme version of consistency, is something that I've never achieved. And something that I still struggle to this day with. It's like you have to do something at it almost on a day-to-day basis. Keep on going at it, regardless of its, if it's toughness, if it's easy, if you're motivated. It becomes a habitual process. And I think that's maybe the consistency that I fall into. That's the consistency that maybe I'll even want to almost debunk a little bit, because I think there is other idea of being consistent. But basically, kind of overall summarize, consistency is one of those things where I feel like it is extremely, if not the most important trait into people's growth. And it's something that I really wish I had early in my life, whether that is in 20s, whether that is even in teens, even in the 30s, something that I kind of struggle with to this day. So I'll toss that back to you, Luki. Like, how would you define consistent? Because I feel like there is something there, especially with what happened, what you did in Deloitte. I feel like there needs to be a consistent cycle there, what you're doing with your current sort of like next venture of your life. There needs to be some sort of consistent process there. So hit me with it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really just doing something like over time, like whether you want to or not, right? And oftentimes consistency takes the form of like a habit, right? Whether it be reading or meditation or going to the gym or even brushing your teeth, right? Like most people are pretty consistent for brushing their teeth, taking a shower, grooming themselves or whatever, but not necessarily so consistent in like proper food choices or sleeping at the right time or connecting with their loved ones or something like that. Right? So consistency is one of those soft skills that is super varied, because in different contexts, a lot of people are good at it, and in many other contexts, they're not so good at it and continuing to grow. And for me, there's a little bit of purposefulness, right? So initially, a habit comes in because you want to, right? So you brush your teeth because you want to have a fresh mouth, right? So you do it purposefully, but eventually it becomes a habit, so that you no longer have to consciously think about it, but it's still purposefully in that. Now, for let's say a bad habit, where I don't know, you eat too many potato chips or whatever, right? That might have been a purposeful habit. So we had one where we watched movies on like Friday nights or like a TV or something, and always crack open like a bag of chips or some snacks and stuff like that, right? That was purposeful at the initial time, but not so purposeful every other time. It just was habitual, right? So
I see.
That can sometimes get you something, an undesired result in the long term. But I'm not sure if that answers your question. But for me, like, consistency is kind of those small things that you do over time, kind of like whether you want to or not, but you at some point had a purposeful, conscious thought of having it get done. How does that align with what you were thinking of?
That's interesting. That's interesting. So let's break that down maybe a little bit further. wondering like, let's say in your career, where let's say something that you were very proud of that you have achieved, where you have obtained, like what would you say consistency kind of put forward itself in that sort of entire journey? Well, that could be with your health, with your relationship, with your career. Like, where do you think, like, something that you felt that you are proud of, and how does how does consistency sort of help you in that sort of entire journey?
I mean, the topic or the achievement that kind of speaks to me is writing the book, which
Right.
was, I mean,
Oh, for
it
sure.
took months, if
That's
not
huge.
year and a half, right? But it was the conscious effort to like, I need to write on a regular basis. So I had a consistent calendar time where I made sure that I wrote something, right? Whether it was good or not, it was beside the point. There was something that was written, and then there was another time where I edited it and like made updates to it, right? So trying to get that consistency, well, resulted in ultimately a book, right? So that's
Right.
what speaks to me. I'm not sure if that's what you were referring to, or is it more like long term? Because like in terms of like a professional habit, it's
Yeah.
I don't know if it stays with me, but I was always one where I was mindful of people's time, right? So I would always be
Okay.
the person coming to a meeting early, right, to
Right.
make sure that that's there, and then making sure that the meeting ends on time, that sort of thing, right? So it
Right.
was the consistency was managing time, if that is a trait too. So that those are kind of the two things that pop to mind when you ask the question.
Oh, very interesting. Oh, very interesting. So I guess let's maybe jump into the book a little bit. During the low times where you have sort of that motivation's not there, obviously the action takes over, the discipline kind of takes over. Like, how did you kind of like navigate the lows?
Um, if I had to reflect back on one of those, it's kind of one of those things where I think, as you said, like it's in the calendar. I'm supposed to do it. Now, would I put my heart and soul in this writing session versus a higher writing session? Maybe not. But I always had like a bare minimum that I had to say, like you got to at least write a paragraph, that sort of thing, right? Whether it's a cohesive paragraph,
Yeah.
a coherent paragraph, or something, would be the other piece. I think what I found is to be helpful from a consistency perspective is I have found that this concept of identity, where basically if you identify that I am someone who writes on a daily basis, who reads or exercises or whatever, when you change your identity, then you automatically want to be congruent.
Oh, very interesting.
There's a concept called like cognitive dissonance, where you always want to have the whatever the identity that you aspire to be, right? So if I say I am a runner, right, versus I'm going for a run, it's very two different things. Because I am a
Oh,
runner means
very
that every day
interesting.
I will run, right? Because I am a runner, right? Versus I'm a person that runs 3 times. I run 3 times a week. Is a little bit different. So I
Oh,
started
very
incorporating
interesting.
more of the identity vocabulary into my words as well, whenever I need to do something on a consistent basis.
So I think in the beginning you were saying about like the idea of like purpose and how that drives the idea of consistency as well. So how does the idea of purpose sort of relate back into this idea of an identity? Like, is that does identity gives that purpose so you can be more consistent?
Does identity give you purpose? I guess they're interrelated in the sense that when you identify with it, like that
Yeah,
is you, and that is, I guess, if that's you, then that's your purpose, right? Now, I wouldn't say that my purpose is to be a runner, exerciser, or book writer, or whatever.
yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah.
necessarily say that, but it kind of serves me at a point in time. Like my purpose, well, I often tell people that I found my purpose helping others find theirs, right? So it's
For sure.
learning all of the soft skills, all these unlocks, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, the all those different things that will hopefully trigger something in someone else that says, "Oh yeah, now I know what I want to do when I grow up," right? Or right
Right,
now
right.
in terms of purpose and passion, right? So that they have a little bit more direction. But yeah, I mean, is purpose and identity interrelated? I think they're close cousins. Something like that.
Okay, okay. That's very interesting. I really it's really interesting when you say the idea of identity. Say like it's like when you say like running, right? It's like I am a runner instead of saying I'm going running. I think that shifts the mindset. It gives a sense of, man, I don't really know what it is, but I mean, I'll kind of put myself in that example, right? So I think even in terms of training, so let's say let's take basketball for example. Basketball is one of those things where I wouldn't say it's. I mean, it really defines on how you define consistency, but it's something that I would say I'm okay at it, right? I have it's been in my life for however long. Like it's been back since I was in junior high school when I first started playing it. I think to this day, I think there has been improvement in sort of my game in a yearly basis. And people can say that's consistent. People can say that's not. I don't know. Obviously, if you break down into the nuances, we can analyze it there. But even in terms of basketball, the idea of identity kind of comes in where I think if I'm going in and just saying I'm going to just shoot around, right, mess around, sort of the motivation and sort of the consistent behaviors in there. But I think if I put myself to say like I am a hooper, right, to use basketball lingo or say like I am a basketball player, like I am a hooper. I train because I want to, again, like I associate myself with that sort of identity. I think that puts the drive and makes the passion goes in a little bit deeper and makes the sort of even the day-to-day session a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I find that words, I mean, have a lot of power when you call yourself like a hooper. Like that means very different things to different people, right?
For sure.
So for some people, it's just like, yeah, I mess around on the court like once a week, once a month, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And for others, like, well, I'm on my way to the NBA.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are two very different perspectives, right? And the improvement for someone with those two different uses of that identity will be different as well, right? And yeah, I mean, the consistency is like, yeah, you're at the community basketball court every Friday, rain or shine, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
that's a sign of consistency. Or it could be that, you know what, every day I'm working on my jump shot, my layup, whatever, and improving it just a fraction
of a percent. All the lingos, you got it there. Okay, I see you, Rookie.
Yeah, I pretend I know what I'm talking about most of the time. But yeah, I mean, it's one where if we think about consistency, it's very contextual, right?
Absolutely.
One thing that I find is interesting related to the identity part is the term congruence, which relates to consistency, because congruence is basically that you the sum is that whatever you believe, you do the same thing.
Right.
You walk the walk and you talk the talk, that sort of thing, right? And when they're aligned, things are easy. Mm-hmm. When they're misaligned, then things become hard. So that when your identity is whatever you want to be doing, consistency is easy, right? But when they're misaligned, then the consistency can be much more difficult, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Or what is something that you're looking to do more consistently that kind of trigger this conversation, or like that would be helpful to talk about?
I mean, I would say just anything, right? I think it's consistency in a trait itself is something that I wish I was more at.
Yeah, we can break one. Like which one do you think?
Yeah. Sure. We can even say like let's say in terms of training, right? In terms of being healthy, I think in terms of training, I've always been on and off for the last I don't know how many years. I think if you look at in terms of where I started to where I am now, obviously there's growth in that. Right, in terms of being physically stronger, being physically more mobile, but also sort of the mental aspect of it, right? The knowledge in training, whether that is weights, whether that is lifts, whether that is basketball, agility, calisthenics, sort of that array of knowledge definitely increased throughout the times I've been in here. But if we look at sort of like, so again, if you look at the beginning where I am now over the span of like 10, 15 years, there's definitely growth. But if I kind of break it down into a day by day or even a week by week, probably the best is probably a month by month. There hasn't been sort of like an always a consistent grind to it. And so actually which really brings up an interesting topic, because I think consistency aligns a lot with the idea of like frequency. Like, how frequent do you have to be for someone to, or for you yourself as an individual to feel that you're consistent at it, right? So, you know, if you do it once a year, are you consistent at it? You can say, right? Absolutely, you can say, I'm a consistent year to year at it. Like, you celebrate, if you always celebrate New Year's Eve, then you're consistent celebrating New Year's Eve, right? But the idea of frequency of is as a yearly basis. Another saying is like, I'm consistently brushing my teeth. That's a day-to-day thing. I'm consistently sleeping, or I'm consistently drinking water. That's a day-to-day thing. Hopefully drinking water is like, and at least a couple hours a day sort of thing, right? So I think, like, even when we say it has to be very contextualized in terms of like frequency. In terms of that frequency, let's just say I don't know if you can or cannot, but if you say in a frequency basis and something that they want to develop in their life, is there a magic number of being consistent at it? Is it like it has to be like at least a week to week thing? Has to be like a couple of day thing? Like, is there a magic number to being consistent, or is it like is it all just super subjective in terms of what the actual action is?
I think there is definitely subjectiveness to what it is, right? So if you're talking about something like training, right? So one perspective for you is maybe that you are consistent, but on, like, let's say a yearly cycle where like 3 out of 4 months I'm on, and then there's 1 month I'm off. Right, so it's almost like your seasonality is every 4 or 5, whatever it is, right? And you're consistently like that, right? But on the day-to-day scale, because you're off that month, you're off. so that's
absolutely.
I would probably say that generalities is kind of at least more than monthly. The idea is like daily. If you do something daily, then people will notice that you're consistent. If you do something weekly, a few people might. Monthly, again, less people will notice that sort of thing. And then the impact will compound on itself, right? So I don't know if there's a magic number, but like, I like to contextualize things, because with things like soft skills, like consistency, there's so much variability. Like, whether you're dealing with learning, reading a book, right? You don't have to read a book daily, right? You can read a book weekly, right? And every Sunday evening you read a book, and that can be consistent, right? Versus training, well, if you work out once a week, I mean, that's still better than zero, but it's still probably not the most optimal conditions for that too, right? So, but I think more than zero is where you want to start to, and then you pick the level that you want to aspire to be
for sure,
right? So what are your thoughts on that?
No, so actually that's a great segue in terms of one of the ideas that I have about consistency before, where it's the idea of like ramping up in terms of frequency, right? Where I think before, again, I think there's a general nuance when you say, like, if you have to be consistent in something, there's the idea of like, you almost have to do it on a day-to-day basis to say that you are consistent in something, right? And I don't necessarily think that's like true, which is a huge fault in terms of mine before, where I'm like, I wish I was more consistent at something. I wish I was doing that. Like, if people say they work out like 2 times a day, where they were like, they were grinding for like, 10, 20 hours, like 10, 18 hours a day in terms of their workload, whatever. And then they want to do it in a day by day. There's always the motivating speakers to say like, hey, you have to get up day and night to do whatever you have to. Every single day you have to do it, right? So I think that idea of like being consistent, is extremely important. I think, again, going back to it, I think is the most important thing. But I think in terms of the frequency, I think everybody is very subjective in terms of how they do it, and especially in terms of how they ease into it, right? So for me, who's someone who I would say struggle with being consistent, just to go from not doing it at all to then, even for training, right? Let's say if I take like take a month off, going from not doing physical activity to that extreme to all of a sudden going 5 times a week, 6 times a week, your body can't handle that, right? Your body starts breaking down. You're like, God damn, everything hurts, and why am I still doing this to myself, right? So at that point, when you're not necessarily consistent in something, to all of a sudden you're going on day by day, your physicality cannot hold yourself accountable. Like, your body is more detrimental to your physical than helping it, right? And I think in the very similar sense, mentally it's the same thing. It's, let's just say, if let's say you haven't been accustomed to absorbing information, right? So let's say reading, for example. If you haven't been reading for such a long time, and all of a sudden you're trying to read, 5-6 hours a day, right? You are technically reading, but then eventually there's going to be a time where you're just going to get burnt out, right? Because the amount of information you're absorbing is just too much for your mental to handle. So then I've always, so the kind of the idea I would say recently kind of came about where it's like, you need an individual needs to find sort of their path, sort of the ramp up period of wherever that magic number is, right? For training, you could ramp up to 5 times a day, you 5 times a week, you could ramp up to 6 times a week, whatever it is. But to go from not going at all to all of a sudden to 5 times, 6 times a week, right? Like, go once a week and then be consistent at it for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then slowly ramp up to where the idea of consistency becomes almost habitual. And then ruling back to it, once you find that habitual sort of action, it becomes almost part of your identity, right? Yeah. And then that identity sort of almost carries you forward to say, hey, I'm becoming more consistent at it, et cetera, and then going forward with it.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what you're looking to accomplish with all of this, right? So if your goal is to, let's say, go to the gym 5 days a week or something, I mean, that's an approach, but is that the optimal approach for everybody? Whereas, I mean, for my health side or from a fitness perspective, what I've adopted instead of doing that, I basically do like 10 minutes of body weight exercises like every single day.
Right.
Now you're not going to be bedridden off of 10 minutes, right? But I'll do like, if you're familiar with like the Tabata, like the high intensity interval training, then you'll do it for like a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And that gasses you and is good enough. But I mean, you have more than enough time to recover versus like a intense 60-90 minute session in the gym where it's like leg day, back day, arm day, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're stretching to the point, you need recovery time for that. So,
for sure.
But I think it is like understanding your limits, because you can't not run and then go to a marathon. You probably want to do like the 10Ks, the halves, and whatever stepping stones in between, because to your point, it could be detrimental for you.
Absolutely.
But I think consistency, a lot of it is whatever you end up saying that you'll do it is I think the ultimate consistency. Whether it's once a week or 10 times a week or whatever it is. Like if I said 2 times, it'll be 2 times. Not 1, it'll be 2. Now, if you do 3 and you're an overachiever, that's okay on occasion too, right? But I think that consistency has a close correlation to making those commitments to yourself and doing what you say you'll do. What are your thoughts?
Oh, very interesting. That's very interesting. So I have a question for you, Lukey. So the idea of being consistent is about doing it, right? So it's a very action-driven thing. So if I say I'm going to do it, then if I'm going to do it 2 times a week, then I'm saying I'm going to be there 2 times a week. Now the question is, does those action needs to lead to certain result? In the sense that, do you need to see improvement from a monthly basis, from a yearly basis, even just incremental, even if it's just a tiny bit of sort of progress moving forward? Like, does that action need to lead something, or can it just be just a purely action-driven thing, in the sense that I'm just going to the gym and just maintaining is perfectly fine? I don't just see sort of improvement in my cardio, sort of in my knowledge impact. Or on the contrary, where do you think it doesn't matter what the result is, because as long as you put in the action, as long as you put your word to say, I'm going to do it, that result will come eventually, and it doesn't matter in terms of what the intention was?
I mean, the intentionality is helpful, but for me, it's more, there's a term like effort versus outcomes.
Okay.
Because a lot of people, when they want to get healthy, it's, I want to lose 10 pounds. Right, that sort of thing is a very common one. Now, the challenge with a lot of folks is muscle weighs more than fat, right? So oftentimes when you, but the thing is, muscle is more compact.
Yeah.
Right. So you might actually weigh more.
Yeah.
Yeah. You might actually weigh more, and be more toned and look better. But you haven't lost the poundage that you want, right? So it's a matter of like, do you need a true goal? And sometimes maintenance is an improvement, right? Because if you think about it, we're all like the law of law of thermodynamics, we're always deteriorating, right, into
Very
something else.
interesting.
So even working out, you're not actually maintaining, you're still improving because you're naturally reducing in whatever you do, right? Like one of the examples that came to mind is like, I've actually made it a more conscious effort to spend time with my kids and do nothing and just play. Like, and that play in itself is the whole point of it is there is no purpose of it, right? So,
It's
but
just
the
purely
goal is
enjoyment.
the goal is not to do anything with a purpose, right? It's just to come. I don't know. You want Lego today? Do you want board game? You want something? It's just for like, what's the point of a board game, right? It's there's nothing. What's the point of Lego?
I feel you.
There's no real point.
I feel you.
But at the same time, there's such a great result that could happen to it too, right? So I think it's there is an intentionality behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can do it because you wanted to. I think is probably the most appropriate too. And
Right.
does it serve you? Right? Because I'm reminded of a quote like there's nothing good or bad, and thinking makes it so.
Oh,
Right?
I love that. Oh, I love that
Yeah.
quote.
So that working out piece, like most people think it's great, but you can overdo it, right? So that and then when you overdo it, that's not a great thing, right? So then you need time to recover and things like that. So sometimes too much. What's that expression? Like too much of a good thing is not good,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, right?
Everything can be an overdose on something.
Yeah, you can be an overdose on whatever. But so yes, you should probably look to be intentional about it,
Yeah.
whether it's maintaining, progressing, taking your mind off of something, or recharging, revectoring, whatever. I
Yeah.
think there should be a purpose to what you want to do if you can, and kind of leads me to what I mentioned before on the purpose side. So what I found from a purpose perspective
Isn't it?
is at least the answer that seems to resonate with most people is the purpose of life is to live life purposefully, where
Okay.
basically whatever you're doing
Absolutely.
today, you consciously chose it to do it. You're not here by accident or just happenstance. You're like, what the heck am I doing today?
Yeah.
But like you purposely put yourself in the situation. Um, like, and it might have been a decision years ago, but you did it here because you want to be here, not because like happenstance. Now, happy accidents happen, right?
For sure.
But ideally you're doing it in a more purposeful thing. So roundabout way of kind of answering your question, but
Very interesting.
yeah.
Very interesting. So yeah, I got sort of the other side. So obviously consistency is a trait in its own, right? Is there anything in your life that you wish that you are more consistent about? Is consistency sort of very satisfactory in your life that you feel that obviously you have the example of your kid, which you are actually, again, it's the idea of maintaining that consistency is a huge piece. Is there anything in your life that you recently found that you're more consistent about? So that process of being more consistent about, talk me through sort of that entire sort of journey in it. Like you can even use the kids one. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of them. But I would say that consistency, as you mentioned, that to me consistency is based on, I guess, the intentionality and purpose. Where like at some point it was consistency in like building the business and biz deving, reaching out to people and asking them to sign up and this and that, right?
Right.
But now that's kind of taken care of. I don't need to be as consistent on that. So now I reprioritize the kids. Now the kids will be taken over, and then something else will happen. So consistency, I don't know if it has to be for your lifetime. It's probably for your period of time as well, where
That's very
different
interesting.
things are important to different people, and then it's the intentionality of being consistent. So yeah, right now the priority for me is spending time with the kids as much as possible, and working on myself in the process, because I find that when I'm stressed at work, then I take it out on the kids, but
No, that's true.
and
That's
yell
true.
at them for no
It's
reason,
true.
right? So I'm making it a more conscious, where I'm hoping, like on a daily basis, how many times do I yell at the kids, right? And then a weekly basis and a monthly basis, can I reduce that number?
Yeah.
And minimize it much? Maybe I'll never get to zero.
Yeah.
But catch myself as early as possible. It's like, oh, why did I yell at them? Like,
Yeah.
they didn't really do anything. Sure, that they were being silly or whatever, but did they really deserve it?
It's true.
No, not really.
It's true.
So those types of things is what I'm trying to be consistent about. So it's a little bit on them, a little bit on me. What about yourself? What's one thing that you're looking to be more consistent about?
Yeah. So I mean, I think just the idea of, like, there's a couple of points that I think you made, which is interesting. I think number one is the idea of like consistency doesn't necessarily have to run through a lifetime. I think in terms of the trade itself, I feel like that should run it, but in terms of consistent at something very specific, that maybe not have to run its course. Maybe there's a time period to it, right? Like you said, initially it's business development and then it's family, because eventually there will be a time where, your kids are grown up, right? They are off to university, they have their own life, and the amount of time or consistent time they have to spend with them, hopefully it's not the same as, when they were in diapers, you have to take care of them 24/7, right?
Hope not.
Hope not. So I think that's a piece that's really interesting. I think in terms of, for me, if I break it down to something that I want to do more consistent in my life. So I think number one, even in terms of work effort, in terms of work quality, I do find myself going through a lot of ups and downs. My highs are extremely high. It burns through the fire, which is in a sense is, I guess in a sense, pretty good for consulting because you need the highs and lows. It matches really up with sort of the clientele's. But then sort of my lows are sort of my, my times now, right? Where it feels burned out. It feels that there's a lack of care in terms of that. The work quality isn't there. The work sort of effort isn't there. There's a sense of feeling like, letting people down, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's an idea of like having a little bit more consistent in terms of work level, but then especially in terms of when we talk about the idea of being purposeful, the idea of finding yourself an identity, right? I think that's something that I think I can definitely take away in terms of being a little bit more like identify to myself, not necessarily as a consultant, right? Or as a Deloitter. I don't think that's necessarily the identity, but identify as someone who is reliable, right? Who is, who is accountable, right? I think that identity becomes a lot more purposeful than having like consultant, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I think consultant is an identity for someone that can put in the drive of being consistent. I don't know if identity is for me specifically, but I think the idea of being accountable, of being reliable, I think being a proper human being, I think those are sort of identity that is a little bit more drive for me. And see if we can kind of put that into the works.
Yeah, and I'm reminded when we talk about consistency, like over a lifetime or over a period, like I find it has a bit of a seasonality to it too, right? Where you talk about your ups, your highs are your highs, and then your lows are low.
Right,
but,
right.
Like summer comes and then it eventually turns to winter, right? So like sometimes it's a cold and frigid winter.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a very mild winter too. Sometimes it's a beautiful long summer. Sometimes it's a dry, hot, and whatever, right?
Absolutely.
So I think life and consistency can also have that as well. But winter will come. Summer will be there, and eventually spring will be there, and fall as well. So consistency, I think, probably has a correlation or a relation to that seasonality as well. But yeah, I think this has been an interesting conversation. And if the takeaway is kind of identity, has there been anything else that you've implemented that has helped you with your consistency over the years?
I think definitely the idea of being a ramp up period. I think it's like even we can even put it in terms of the training schedule, right? I think there's two folds to it. The idea of ramping up and the idea of being okay to ramp up. I think is two very crucial factors, because I think it obviously depends on the individual itself. Is when you want to get back into something, right? Get back into a healthy habit. There's the idea of I want to jump, right back to where I was, right? Let's say if you were training 5 times a week, let's say if you were hustling your own business, the idea of grinding every single day, right? You were once that person, but obviously you fell off it, or you haven't been able to keep that action for a long time. So the energy level isn't there. Your body can't sustain it, right? Whatever it is. And then number one is being okay to say, I'm not that person right now. I can still get there, but let me just take sort of baby steps to go forward. And let me be okay with that instead of feeling rushed, instead of feeling pressured. Let me just do it at least, once a week, maybe even once every 2 weeks, right? and then having that ramp up period to eventually get to where you are, and kind of trusting that process of, I will get there, but it's going to take time, right? And right now I'm not in that mindset. My body's not in the best form shape. So let me have that ramp up period, and then really just kind of being consistent in that ramp up period, and to say, once my body feels comfortable, my mind is there, let's go up in frequency, and let's eventually get to a frequency where I was at my peak. And maybe when you're at the peak, we can push it a little bit further, right? Whether that's the intensity of whatever you're trying to do, increase that a little bit, whether that's the frequency of which you're trying to increase that a little bit. The idea of having the ramp up and being okay with the ramp up, I think, is very important.
For sure. It's kind of like the crawl before you walk before you run.
For sure.
That sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Definitely want to do that. And one thing that it reminded me of when you were speaking is a conversation that I was having with someone about people don't mind starting from the bottom.
Yeah.
But they don't want to be seen starting from the bottom.
Absolutely.
Because oftentimes, like the posting on YouTube, people don't mind starting because they can do it, but they don't want to be seen that, my video only got 2 views.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And my next video only got 5 views.
Yeah.
And my next video, whatever. They want to see the viral, the first video is a viral post.
For sure.
that sort of thing, right?
For sure.
But to your point, that it often takes time for any of those things to develop, and just being consistent and kind of using whatever motivations you can to work through it, whether it be identity or just an understanding.
Absolutely.
Can be helpful. So yeah, I think that was an interesting conversation about consistency, and hopefully folks, our listeners, were able to take a few tidbits on it, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're trying to make consistent in your lives, and what has helped you and what has hindered you, and any other thoughts or comments you have on this. So thanks, Brian, for the conversation. Anything that you want to share to the audience before we go about consistency?
No, just go out and try to be consistent.
For sure. Yeah, be consistent. Whether it's day over day, week over week, month over month, whatever it is, it's your period over period. But yeah, thanks everyone. And Brian, hopefully we'll have you back for future episodes.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.